This is part 3 of the Oera Linda book, edited and read by 31 Pearls. If you've missed parts 1 and 2, links can be found in the description. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. The Oera Linda book. All this is inscribed not only on the Waraburgt, but also on the Burgt Stavia, which lies behind the port of Stavre. When Tunis wished to return home, he went first towards Denmark, but he might not land there, for so the mother had ordered. Nor was he to land at Flyland, nor anywhere about there. In this way he would have lost all his people by want and hardship, so he landed at night to steal and sailed on by day. Thus, coasting along, he at length arrived at the colony of Cadiz, which is Cadiz, or Cadiz, so called because it was built with a stone quay. Here they bought all kinds of stores. But Tuntia, the Burgtmaagd, would not allow them to settle there. When they were ready, they began to disagree. Tunis wished to sail through the straits to the Mediterranean Sea and enter the service of the rich Egyptian king as he had done before. But Inka said he had had enough of all those find-us people. Inka thought that perchance some high-lying part of Atlantis, Atland, might remain as an island, where he and his people might live in peace. As the two cousins could not agree, Tunis planted a red flag on the shore, and Inka a blue flag. Every man could choose which he pleased. And to their astonishment, the greater part of the Finns and Magyars followed Inka, who had objected to serve the kings of find-us people. When they had counted the people and divided the ships accordingly, the fleet separated. We shall hear of Tunis afterwards, but nothing more of Inka.
Editor's note. It is our belief, based solely on this writing, that Inka, and those who accompanied him, established the Incan Empire of South America. As it states, they were going to sail westward to seek out remnants of Atlantis, which was gone, but it would be likely they continued west, ultimately to America.
Tunis coasted through the straits to the Mediterranean Sea. When Atlantis was submerged, there was much suffering also on the shores of the Mediterranean, on which account many of find-us people, Krekelanders, and people from Lida's land came to us. On the other hand, many of our people went to Lida's land. The result of all this was that the Krekelanders, far and wide, were lost to the superintendence of the mother. Tunis had reckoned on this, and had therefore wished to find there a good haven from which he might go and serve under the rich princes. But as his fleet and his people had such a shattered appearance, the inhabitants on the coasts thought that they were pirates and drove them away. At last they arrived at the Phoenician coast, 193 years after Atlantis was submerged. Near the coast they found an island with 2 deep bays, so that there appeared to be 3 islands. In the middle one, they established themselves, and afterwards built a city wall round the place. Then they wanted to give it a name but disagreed about it. Some wanted to call it Fryasburgt, others Neftunia, but the Magyars and Finns begged that it might be called Tyre-Hisburgt. Tyre-Hisburgt is Tyre. Tyre, the son of Odin, was the name of one of their idols, and it was upon his feast day that they had landed there, and in return they offered to recognize Tunis as their perpetual king. Tunis let himself be persuaded, and the others would not make any quarrel about it. When they were well established, they sent some old seamen and Magyars on an expedition as far as the town of Sidon. But at first the inhabitants of the coast would have nothing to do with them, saying, "You are only foreign adventurers whom we do not respect." But when we sold them some of our iron weapons, everything went well. They also wished to buy our amber, and their inquiries about it were incessant. But Tunis, who was far-seeing, pretended that he had no more iron weapons, or amber. Then merchants came and begged him to let them have 20 vessels, which they would freight with the finest goods, and they would provide as many people to row as he would require. 12 ships were then laden with wine, honey, tanned leather, and saddles and bridles, mounted in gold, such as had never been seen before. Tunis sailed to the Flymere with all this treasure, which so enchanted the Geertmen of West Flyland that he induced Tunis to build a warehouse at the mouth of the Flymere. Afterwards this place was called Almanaland, or Amyland, and the market where they traded at Wieringen was called Toella Atmarkt. The mother advised that they should sell everything except iron weapons, but no attention was paid to what she said. As the Tyriers had thus free play, they came from far and near to take away our goods, to the loss of our seafaring people. Therefore it was resolved in a general assembly to allow only 7 Tyrian ships and no more in a year. The Oera book. What the consequence of this was. In the northernmost part of the Mediterranean, there lies an island close to the coast. They now came and asked to buy that, on which a general council was held. The mother's advice was asked, and she wished to see them at some distance, so she saw no harm in it. But as we afterwards saw what a mistake we had made, we called the island Miscelia, which is Marseille, which is in modern-day France. Hereafter will be seen what reason we had. The Golan, also known as the Galli, or the Gauls, as the missionary priests of Sidon were called, had observed that the land there was thinly peopled, and was far from the mother. In order to make a favorable impression, they had themselves called in our language followers of the truth, but they had better have been called abstainers from the truth, or in short, Triuvenden, as our seafaring people afterwards called them. When they were well established, their merchants exchanged their beautiful copper weapons and all sorts of jewels for our iron weapons and hides of wild beasts, which were abundant in our southern countries. But the Golan celebrated all sorts of vile and monstrous festivals, which the inhabitants of the coast promoted, with their wanton women and sweet, poisonous wine. If any of our people had so conducted himself that his life was in danger, the Golan afforded him a refuge, and sent him to Phoenicia, that is, Palmland. When he was settled there, they made him write to his family, friends, and connections, that the country was so good, and the people so happy, that no one could form any idea of it. In Britain there were plenty of men, but few women. When the Golan knew this, they carried off girls everywhere, and gave them to the Britons for nothing. So all these girls served their purpose, to steal children from Raalda, in order to give them to false gods. The Oera book. Now, we will write about the war between the Burgtmaagd and Kalta and Min-erva, and how we thereby lost all our southern lands, and Britain, to the Golan. Near the southern mouth of the Rhine and the Scheldt, there are 7 islands, named after Freya's 7 virgins of the week. In the middle of one island is the city of Walhalligara, Middelburg, and on the walls of this city, the following history is inscribed. Above it are the words, read, learn, and watch. 563 years after the submersion of Atlantis, that is 1,600 years before Christ, a wise town priestess presided here, whose name was Min-erva, called by the sailors Nihilania. This name was well chosen, for her counsels were new and clear above all others. On the other side of the Scheldt, at Fryasburgt, Cyrhed presided. This maiden was full of tricks, her face was beautiful, and her tongue was nimble. But the advice that she gave was always conveyed in mysterious terms. Therefore the mariners called her Kalta, and the landsmen thought it was a title. In the last will of the dead mother, Rosamond was named first, Min-erva second, and Cyrhed third in succession. Min-erva did not mind that, but Cyrhed was very much offended. Like a foreign princess, she wished to be honored, feared, and worshipped, but Min-erva only desired to be loved. At last all the sailors, even from Denmark and Flymere, did homage to her. This hurt Cyrhed, because she wanted to excel Min-erva. In order to give an impression of her great watchfulness, she had a cock put on her banner. So then, Min-erva went and put a sheepdog and an owl on her banner, The dog, she said, guards his master and his flock, and the owl watches that the mice shall not devastate the fields. But the cock, in his lewdness and his pride, is only fit to murder his nearest relations. When Kalta found that her scheme had failed, she was still more vexed, so she secretly sent for the Magyars to teach her conjuring. When she had had enough of this, she threw herself into the hands of the Gauls. But all her malpractices did not improve her position. When she saw that the sailors kept more and more aloof from her, she tried to win them back by fear. At the full moon, when the sea was stormy, she ran over the wild waves, calling to the sailors that they would all be lost if they did not worship her. Then she blinded their eyes so that they mistook land for water and water for land, and in this way, many a good ship was totally lost. At the first war feast, when all her countrymen were armed, she brought casks of beer, which she had drugged. When they were all drunk, she mounted her war horse, leaning her head upon her spear. Sunrise could not be more beautiful. When she saw that the eyes of all were fixed upon her, she opened her lips and said, "Sons and daughters of Phrygia, you know that in these last times we have suffered much loss and misery, because the sailors no longer come to buy our paper. But you do not know what the reason of it is. I have long kept silence about it, but can do so no longer. Listen then, my friends, that you may know on which side to show your teeth. On the other side of the Scheldt, where from time to time there come ships from all parts, they make now paper from pumpkin leaves, by which they save flax and outdo us. Now, as the making of paper was always our principal industry, the mother willed that people should learn it from us. But Min-erva has bewitched all the people. Yes, bewitched, my friends, as well as all our cattle that died lately. I must come out with it. If I were not Burgtmaagd, I should know what to do. I should burn the witch in her nest." As soon as she had uttered these words, she sped away to her citadel. But the drunken people were so excited that they did not stop to weigh what they had heard. In mad haste, they hurried over the sandfall, and as night came on, they burst into the citadel. However, Kalta again missed her aim. For Min-erva, her maidens, and her lamp were all saved by the alertness of the seamen. The Oera book. We now come to the history of Jon. Jon, Joan, Sean, John are all the same name, though the pronunciation varies, as the seamen like to shorten everything to be able to make it easier to call. Jon, that is, given, was a sea king, born at Burgt, who sailed from the Flymere with a fleet of 127 ships, fitted out for a long voyage and laden with amber, tin, copper, cloth, linen, felt, otter skins, beaver, and rabbit skins. He would also have taken paper from here, but when he saw how Kalta Min's daughter, had destroyed the citadel, he became so angry that he went off with all his people to Fryasburgt, and out of revenge set fire to it. His admiral and some of his people saved the lamp and the maidens, but they could not catch Kalta. She climbed up on the furthest battlement, and they thought she must be killed in the flames. But what happened? While all her people stood transfixed with horror, she appeared upon her steed more beautiful than ever, calling to them, to Kalta. Then the other Scheldt people poured out towards her. When the seamen saw that, they shouted, "We are for Min-erva," from which arose a war in which thousands were killed. At this time Rosamond, the mother, who had done all in her power by gentle means to preserve peace, when she saw how bad it was, made short work of it. Immediately she sent messengers throughout all the districts to call a general levy, which brought together all the defenders of the country. The landsmen who were fighting were all caught, but Jon with his seamen took refuge on board his fleet, taking with him the 2 lamps, as well as Min-erva and the maidens of both the citadels. Helprik the chief summoned him to appear. But while all the soldiers were on the other side of the Scheldt, Jon sailed back to the Flymere, and then straight to our islands. His fighting men and many of our people took women and children on board, and when Jon saw that he and his people would be punished for their misdeeds, he secretly took his departure. He did well, for all our islanders and the other Scheldt people who had been fighting were transported to Britain. This step was a mistake, for now came the beginning of the end. Kalta, who, people said, could go as easily on the water as on the land, went to the mainland and on to Massalia, Marseille. Then came the Gauls out of the Mediterranean Sea, with their ships to Cadiz and along all our coasts, and fell upon Britain. But they could not make any good footing there, because the government was powerful, and the exiles were still Frisians. But now came Kalta and said, "You were born free, and for small offenses have been sent away, not for your own improvement, but to get tin by your labor. If you wish to be free again, and take my advice, and live under my care, come away. I will provide you with arms, and will watch over you." The news flew through the land like lightning, and before the carrier's wheel had made one revolution, she was mistress of all the terriers in all our southern states, as far as the river Seine. She built herself a citadel on the high land to the north, and called it Kaltasburg. It still exists under the name of Karanach. From this castle she ruled as a true mother, against their will, not for her followers but over them, who were thenceforth called Celts. The Gauls gradually obtained dominion over the whole of Britain, partly because they no longer had any citadel, secondly because they had there no Burgtmaagden, and thirdly because they had no real lamps. From all these causes the people could not learn anything. They were stupid and foolish, and having allowed the Gauls to rob them of their arms, they were led about like a bull with a ring in his nose. The Oera book. Now we shall write how it fared with Jon. It is inscribed at Texland, 10 years after Jon went away. There arrived 3 ships in the Flymere. The people cried, "Huzzah," which means, "What a blessing." And from their accounts, the mother had this written. When Jon reached the Mediterranean Sea, the reports of the Gauls had preceded him, so that on the nearest Italian coast, he was nowhere safe. Therefore, he went with his fleet straight over to Libya. There the black men wanted to catch them and eat them. At last they came to Tyre, but Min-erva said, "Keep clear, for here the air has been long poisoned by the priests." The king was a descendant of Tunis, as we were afterwards informed, but as the priests wished to have a king, who, according to their ideas, was of long descent, they deified Tunis to the vexation of his followers. After they had passed Tyre, the Tyrians seized one of the rearmost ships, and as the ship was too far behind us, we could not take it back again, but Jon swore to be revenged for it. When night came, Jon bent his course towards the distant Krekelanden. At last they arrived at a country that looked very barren, but they found a harbor there. "Here," said Min-erva, "we need not perhaps have any fear of princes or priests, as they always look out for rich, fat lands." When they entered the harbor, there was not room for all the ships, and yet most of the people were too cowardly to go any further. Then Jon, who wished to get away, went with his spear and banner, calling to the young people, to know who would volunteer to share his adventures. Min-erva did the same thing, but she wished to remain there. The greater part stopped with Min-erva, but the young sailors went with Jon. Jon took the lamp of Kalta and her maidens with him. Min-erva retained her lamp and her own maidens. Between the near and the distant coasts of Italy, Jon found some islands, which he thought desirable. Upon the largest, he built a city in the wood, between the mountains. From the smaller islands he made expeditions for vengeance on the Tyrians, and plundered their ships and their lands. Therefore these islands were called Insulae Piratarum, which is Latin for Pirate Island, as well as Johannes Insulae, Latin for John's Island, When Min-erva had examined the country, which is called by the inhabitants Attica, she saw that the people were all goat herds, and that they lived on meat, wild roots, herbs, and honey. They were clothed in skins, and had their dwellings on the Hellinga, their word for slopes, of the hills. Wherefore they were called Hellingers. At first they ran away, but when they found that we did not attack them, they came back and showed great friendship. Min-erva asked if we might settle there peaceably. This was agreed to, on the condition that we should help them to fight against their neighbors, who came continually to carry away their children and to rob their dwellings. Then we built a citadel at an hour's distance from the harbor. By the advice of Min-erva it was called Athens, because, she said, those who come after us ought to know that we are not here by cunning or violence, but were received as Atha, which means friends. While we were building the citadel, the principal personages came to see us, and when they saw that we had no slaves, it did not please them, and they gave her to understand it, as they thought that she was a princess. But Min-erva said, "How did you get your slaves?" They answered, "We bought some and took others in war." Min-erva replied, "If nobody would buy slaves, they would not steal your children, and you would have no wars about it. If you wish to remain our allies, you will free your slaves." The chiefs did not like this, and wanted to drive us away, but the most enlightened of the people came and helped us to build our citadel, which was built of stone. This is the history of Jon, and of Min-erva. When they had finished their story, they asked respectfully for iron weapons, for said they, "Our foes are powerful, but if we have good arms, we can withstand them." When this had been agreed to, the people asked if Phrygia's customs would flourish in Athens and in other parts of Greece, Krekalanden. The mother answered, "If the distant Greeks belong to the direct descent of Phrygia, then they will flourish. But if they do not descend from Phrygia, then there will be a long contention about it, because the carrier must make 5,000 revolutions of his jewel before find us people will be ripe for liberty." The Oera book. This is about the Geertmen. When Helenia, or Min-erva, died, the priests pretended to be with us, and in order to make it appear so, they deified Helenia. They refused to have any other mother chosen, saying that they feared there was no one among her maidens whom they could trust, as they had trusted Min-erva, surnamed Nehelenia. But we would not recognize Min-erva as a goddess, because she herself had told us that no one could be perfectly good, except the spirit of Raalda. Therefore we chose Geertpyr's daughter for our mother. When the priests saw that they could not fry their herrings on our fire, a colloquialism used to mean have everything their own way, they left Athens, and said that we refused to acknowledge Min-erva as a goddess out of envy, because she had shown so much affection to the natives. Thereupon they gave the people statues of her, declaring that they might ask of them whatever they liked, as long as they were obedient to her. By these kinds of tales the stupid people were estranged from us, and at last they attacked us. But as we had built our stone city wall with 2 horns down to the sea, they could not get at us. Then, lo and behold, an Egyptian high priest, bright of eye, clear of brain, and enlightened of mind, whose name was Cecrops, came to give them advice. When he saw that with his people he could not storm our wall, he sent messengers to Tyre. Thereupon there arrived 300 ships full of wild mountain soldiers, which sailed unexpectedly into our haven while we were defending the walls. When they had taken our harbor, the wild soldiers wanted to plunder the village and our ships. One had already ravished a girl, but Cecrops would not permit it. And the Tyrian sailors, who still had Frisian blood in their veins, said, "If you do that, we will burn our ships, and you shall never see your mountains again." Cecrops, who had no inclination towards murder or devastation, sent messengers to Geert, requiring her to give up the citadel. offering her free exit with all her live and dead property, and her followers the same. The wisest of the citizens, seeing that they could not hold the citadel, advised Geert to accept at once, before Cecrops became furious and changed his mind. 3 months afterwards, Geert departed with the best of Fria's sons, and 7 times 12 ships. Soon after they had left the harbor, they fell in with at least 30 ships coming from Tyre, with women and children. They were on their way to Athens, but when they heard how things stood there, they went with Geert. The sea king of the Tyrians brought them all together through the strait, which at that time ran into the Red Sea, now re-established as the Suez Canal. At last they landed at the Punjab, called in our language the 5 Rivers, because 5 rivers flowed together to the sea. Here they settled and called it Geertmania. The king of Tyre afterwards, seeing that all his best sailors were gone, sent all his ships with his wild soldiers to catch them dead or alive. When they arrived at the strait, both the sea and the earth trembled. The land was upheaved, so that all the water ran out of the strait, and the muddy shores were raised up like a rampart. This happened on account of the virtues of the Geertmen, as everyone can plainly understand. The Oera book. In the year 1005, after Atlantis was submerged, this was inscribed on the eastern wall of Fryasburgt. After 12 years had elapsed without our seeing any Italians in Almanland, there came 3 ships, finer than any that we possessed, or had ever seen. On the largest of them was a king of the Ionian Islands whose name was Ulysses, the fame of whose wisdom was great. To him a priestess had prophesied that he should become the king of all Italy, provided he could obtain a lamp that had been lighted at the lamp in Texland. For this purpose he had brought great treasures with him, above all jewels for women more beautiful than had ever been seen before. They were from Troy, a town that the Greeks had taken. All these treasures he offered to the mother, but the mother would have nothing to do with them. At last, when he found that there was nothing to be got from her, he went to Walhallagara, now Walcheren. There was established a Burgtmaagd whose name was Cat, but who was commonly called Calyp by Homer Calypso, because her lower lip stuck out like a masthead. Here he tarried for years, to the scandal of all that knew it. According to the report of the maidens, he obtained a lamp from her, but it did him no good, because when he got to sea his ship was lost, and he was taken up naked and destitute by another ship. There was left behind by this king a writer of pure Fria's blood, born in the new harbor of Athens, who wrote for us what follows about Athens, from which may be seen how truly the mother Hylict spoke, when she said that the customs of Phria could never take firm hold in Athens. From the other Greeks you will have heard a great deal of bad about Cecrops, because he was not in good repute. But I dare affirm that he was an enlightened man, very renowned, both among the inhabitants and among us, for he was against oppression, unlike the other priests, and was virtuous and knew how to value the wisdom of distant nations. Knowing that, he permitted us to live according to our own Asagabok. There was a story current that he was favorable to us, because he was the son of a Frisian girl and an Egyptian priest. The reason of this was that he had blue eyes, and that many of our girls had been stolen and sold to Egypt. But he never confirmed this. However it may have been, certain it is that he showed us more friendship than all the other priests together. When he died, his successors soon began to tear up our charters, and gradually to enact so many unsuitable statutes that at long last nothing remained of liberty, but the shadow and the name. Besides, they would not allow the laws to be written, so that the knowledge of them was hidden from us. Formerly all the cases in Athens were pleaded in our language, but afterwards in both languages, and at last in the native language only. At first the men of Athens only married women of our own race, But the young men, as they grew up with the girls of the country, took them to wife. The bastard children of this connection were the handsomest and cleverest in the world, but they were likewise the wickedest, wavering between the two parties, paying no regard to laws or customs except where they suited their own interests. As long as a ray of Freya's spirit existed, all the building materials were for common use, and no one might build a house larger or better than his neighbors. But when some degenerate townspeople got rich by sea voyages and by the silver that their slaves got in the silver countries, they went to live out on the hills or in the valleys. There, behind high enclosures of trees or walls, they built palaces with costly furniture, and in order to remain in good odor with the nasty priests, they placed there likenesses of false gods and unchaste statues. Sometimes the dirty priests and princes wished for the boys rather than the girls, and often led them astray from the paths of virtue by rich presents or by force. Because riches were more valued by this lost and degenerate race than virtue or honor, one sometimes saw boys dressed in splendid flowing robes, to the disgrace of their parents and maidens, and to the shame of their own sex. If our simple parents came to a general assembly at Athens and made complaints, a cry was raised, "Here, here, there is a sea monster going to speak." Such is Athens become, like a morass in a tropical country full of leeches, toads, and poisonous snakes, in which no man of decent habits can set his foot. The Oera book. This is inscribed in all our citadels. How our Denmark was lost to us, 1,602 years after the submersion of Atlantis. Through the mad wantonness of Woden, Magy had become master of the east part of Scandinavia. They dare not come over the hills and over the sea. The mother would not prevent it. She said, "I see no danger in their weapons, but much in taking the Scandinavians back again, because they are so degenerate and spoilt." The General Assembly were of the same opinion, therefore it was left to him. A good 100 years ago, Denmark began to trade. They gave their iron weapons in exchange for gold ornaments, as well as for copper and iron ore. The mother sent messengers to advise them to have nothing to do with this trade. There was danger to their morals in it, and if they lost their morals, they would soon lose their liberty. But the Denmarkers paid no attention to her. They did not believe that they could lose their morals, therefore they would not listen to her. At last they were at a loss themselves for weapons and necessaries, and this difficulty was their punishment. Their bodies were brilliantly adorned, but their cupboards and their sheds were empty. Just 100 years after the first ship with provisions sailed from the coast, poverty and want made their appearance. Hunger spread her wings all over the country. Dissension marched proudly about the streets and into the houses. Charity found no place, and unity departed. The child asked its mother for food. She had no food to give, only jewels. The women appealed to their husbands. The husbands appealed to the counts. The counts had nothing to give, or if they had, they hid it away. Now the jewels must be sold, but while the sailors were away for that purpose, the frost came and laid a plank upon the sea in the strait. When the frost had made the bridge, vigilance ceased in the land, and treachery took its place. Instead of watching on the shores, they put their horses in their sledges and drove off to Scandinavia. Then the Scandinavians, who hungered after the land of their forefathers, came to Denmark. One bright night they all came. "Now," they said, "we have a right to the land of our fathers." And while they were fighting about it, the Finns came to the defenseless villages and ran away with the children. As they had no good weapons, they lost the battle, and with it their freedom, and Magy became master. All this was the consequence of their not reading Freya's texts and neglecting her counsels. There are some who think that they were betrayed by the counts, and that the maidens had long suspected it, but if anyone attempted to speak about it, his mouth was shut by golden chains. We can express no opinion about it. We can only say to you, do not trust too much to the wisdom of your princes or of your maidens, but if you wish to keep things straight, everybody must watch over his own passions, as well as the general welfare. 2 years afterwards, Magy himself came, with a fleet of light boats to steal the lamp from the mother of Texland. This wicked deed he accomplished one stormy winter night, while the wind roared, and the hail rattled against the windows. The watchman on the tower, hearing the noise, lighted his torch. As soon as the light from the tower fell upon the bastion, he saw that already armed men had got over the wall. He immediately gave the alarm, but it was too late. Before the guard was ready, there were 2,000 people battering the gate. The struggle did not last long. As the guard had not kept a good watch, they were overwhelmed. While the fight was going on, a rascally Finn stole into the chamber of the mother and would have done her violence. She resisted him and threw him down against the wall. When he got up, he ran his sword through her. "If you will not have me, you shall have my sword." A Danish soldier came behind him and clave his head in two. There came from it a stream of black blood and a wreath of blue flame. The Magy had the mother nursed on his own ship. As soon as she was well enough to speak clearly, the Magy told her that she must sail with him, but that she should keep her lamp and her maidens, and should hold a station higher than she had ever done before. Moreover, he said that he should ask her in presence of all his chief men if he would become the ruler of all the country and people of Fria, that she must declare and affirm this, or he would let her die a painful death. Then when he had gathered all his chiefs around her bed, he asked in a loud voice, "Frana, since you are a prophetess, shall I become ruler over all the lands and people of Fria?" Frana did as if she took no notice of him, but at last she opened her lips and said, "My eyes are dim, but the other light dawns upon my soul. Yes, I see it. Hear, Irtha, and rejoice with me." At the time of the submersion of Atlantis, Atland, the first spoke of the jewel stood at the top. After that it went down, and our freedom with it. When 2 spokes, or 2,000 years, shall have rolled down, the sons shall arise, who have been bred of the fornication of the princes and priests with the people, and shall witness against their fathers. They shall all fall by murder, but what they have proclaimed shall endure, and shall bear fruit in the bosoms of able men, like good seed which is laid in thy lap. Yet 1,000 years shall the spoke descend, and sink deeper in darkness, and in the blood shed over Jon by the wickedness of the princes and priests. After that the dawn shall begin to glow. When they perceive this, the false princes and priests will strive and wrestle against freedom. But freedom, love, and unity will take the people under their protection and rise out of the vile pool. The light, which at first only glimmered, shall gradually become a flame. The blood of the bad shall flow over your surface, but you must not absorb it. At last, the poisoned animals shall eat it and die of it. All the stories that have been written in praise of the princes and priests shall be committed to the flames. Thenceforth your children shall live in peace." When she had finished speaking, she sank down. The Magy, who had not understood her, shrieked out, "I have asked you if I should become master of all the lands and people of Fria, and now you have been speaking to another." Frana raised herself up, stared at him, and said, "Before 7 days have passed, your soul shall haunt the tombs with the night birds, and your body shall be at the bottom of the sea." "Very good," said the Magy, swelling with rage. "Say that I am coming." Then he said to his executioners, "Throw this woman overboard." This was the end of the last of the mothers. We do not ask for revenge. Time will provide that. But 1,000 times we will call with Fria, watch, watch, watch. The Oera book. How it fared afterwards with the Magy. After the murder of the mother, he brought the lamp and the maidens into his own ship, together with all the booty that he chose. Afterwards he went up the Flymere, because he wished to take the maiden of Fryasburgt, or Stavre, and install her as mother. But there they were on their guard. The seafaring men of Stavre and Alderga would gladly have gone to Jon, but the great fleet was out on a distant voyage, so they proceeded in their small fleet to Fryasburgt, and kept themselves concealed in a sheltered place behind trees. The Magy approached Fryasburgt in broad daylight. Nevertheless, his men boldly stormed the citadel. But as they landed from the boats, our people sallied forth from the creek, and shot their arrows with balls of burning turpentine upon the fleet. They were so well aimed that many of the ships were instantly on fire. Those left to guard the ships shot at us, but they could not reach us. When at last a burning ship drifted towards the ship of the Magy, he ordered the man at the helm to sheer off, but this man was the Dane who had cleft the head of the Finn. He said, "You sent our Oera to the bottom of the sea to say that you were coming. In the bustle of the fight you might forget it. Now I will take care that you keep your word." The Magy tried to push him off, but the sailor, a real Frisian and strong as an ox, clutched his head with both hands and pitched him into the surging billows. Then he hoisted up his brown shield and sailed straight to our fleet. Thus the maidens came unhurt to us, but the lamp was extinguished and no one knew how that had happened. When those on the uninjured ships heard that the Magy was drowned, they sailed away because their crews were Danes. When the fleet was far enough off, our sailors turned and shot their burning arrows at the Finns. When the Finns saw that and found that they were betrayed, they fell into confusion and lost all discipline and order. At this moment the garrison sallied forth from the citadel. Those who resisted were killed, and those who fled found their death in the marshes of the Crylinger wood. Postscript. When the sailors were in the creek, there was a wag from Stavre among them who said, "Medea may well laugh if we rescue her from her citadel." Upon this, the maidens gave to the creek the name Medea me Lachia, Lake of Medea's Laughter. The occurrences that happened after this everybody can remember. The maidens ought to relate it in their own way and have it well inscribed. We consider that our task is fulfilled. Hail. The end of the book. The Oera Linda book, The Writings of Adelbrost and Apollonia. My name is Adelbrost, the son of Apol and Adela. I was elected by my people as Geertmen over the Lindo Orden. Therefore I will continue this book in the same way as my mother has spoken it. After the Magy was killed and Fryasburgt was restored, a mother had to be chosen. The mother had not named her successor, and her will was nowhere to be found. 7 months later, a general assembly was called at Grenega, because it was on the boundary of Saxamarken. My mother was chosen, but she would not be the mother. She had saved my father's life, in consequence of which they had fallen in love with each other, and she wished to marry. Many people wished my mother to alter her decision, but she said, "An Oera ought to be as pure in her conscience as she appears outwardly, and to have the same love for all her children. Now, as I love Apol better than anything else in the world, I cannot be such a mother." Thus spoke and reasoned Adela, but all the other maidens wished to be the mother. Each state was in favor of its own maiden, and would not yield. Therefore none was chosen, and the kingdom was without any restraint. From what follows you will understand Ludgert, the king who had lately died, had been chosen in the lifetime of the mother, and seemingly, with the love and confidence of all the states. It was his turn to live at the great court of Dochem, and in the lifetime of the mother, great honor was done to him there, as there were more messengers and knights there than had ever been seen there before. But now he was lonely and forsaken, because everyone was afraid that he would set himself above the law and rule them like the slave kings. Every headman imagined that he did enough if he looked after his own state and did not care for the others. With the Burgtmaagden it was still worse. Each of them depended upon her own judgment, and whenever a Geertmen did anything without her, she raised distrust between him and his people. If any case happened which concerned several states and one maid had been consulted, the rest all exclaimed that she had spoken only in the interest of her own state. By such proceedings they brought disputes among the states, and so severed the bond of union that the people of one state were jealous of those of the rest, or at least considered them as strangers. The consequence of which was that the Gauls, or Truenden, the Druids, took possession of our lands as far as the Scheldt, and the Magy as far as the Oera. How this happened my mother has explained. Otherwise this book would not have been written, although I have lost all hope that it would be of any use. I do not write in the hope that I shall win back the land, or preserve it. In my opinion, that is impossible. I write only for the future generations, that they may all know in what way we were lost, and that each may learn that every crime brings its punishment. My name is Apollonia. 32 days after my mother's death, my brother Adelbrost was found murdered on the wharf, his skull fractured and his limbs torn asunder. My father, who lay ill, died of fright. Then my younger brother Apol sailed from here to the west side of Schoonland. There he built a citadel named Lindesburgt, in order there to avenge our wrong. Raalda accorded him many years for that. He had 5 sons, who all caused fear to Magy, and brought fame to my brother. After the death of my mother and my brother, all the bravest of the land joined together and made a covenant, called the Adelbond. In order to preserve us from injury, they brought me, and my youngest brother Adelhert, to the Burgt, me to the maidens, and him to the warriors. When I was 30 years old, I was chosen as Burgtmaagd, and my brother at 50 was chosen Geertmen. From mother's side, my brother was the 6th, but from father's side, the 3rd. By right, therefore, his descendants could not put O Veralinda after their names, but they all wished to do it in honor of their mother. In addition to this, there was given to us also a copy of the book of Adela's followers. That gave me the most pleasure, because it came into the world by my mother's wisdom. In the Burgt I have found other writings also, in praise of my mother. All this I will write afterwards. These are the writings left by Bruno, who was the writer of this Burgt. After the followers of Adel had made copies, each in his kingdom, of what was inscribed upon the walls of the Burgt, they resolved to choose a mother. For this purpose a general assembly was called at this farm. By the first advice of Adela, Tuntia was recommended. That would have been arranged, only that my Burgtmaagd asked to speak. She had always supposed that she would be chosen mother, because she was at the Burgt from which mothers had generally been chosen. When she was allowed to speak, she opened her false lips and said, "You all seem to place great value on Adela's advice, but that shall not shut my mouth. Who is Adele, and whence comes it that you respect her so highly? She was, what I am now, a Burgtmaagd of this place. Is she then wiser and better than I and all the others? Or is she more conversant with our laws and customs? If that had been the case, she would have become mother when she was chosen. But instead of that, she preferred matrimony to a single life, watching over herself and her people. She is certainly very clear-sighted, but my eyes are far from being dim. I have observed that she is very much attached to her husband, which is very praiseworthy, but I see likewise that Tuntia is Apol's niece. Further, I say nothing. The principal people understood very well which way the wind blew with her, but among the people there arose disputes, and as most of the people came from here, they would not give the honor to Tuntia. The conferences were ended, knives were drawn, and no mother was chosen. Shortly afterwards, one of our messengers killed his comrade. As he had been a man of good character hitherto, my Burgtmaagd had permission to help him over the frontier. But instead of helping him over to Twiskland, she fled with him herself to Oera and then to the Magy. The Magy, who wished to please his sons of free, appointed her mother of Waraburgt in Schoonland. But she wished for more, and she told him that if he could get Adele out of the way, he might become master of the whole of Fria's land. She said she hated Adele for having prevented her from being chosen mother. If he would promise her Texland, her messenger should serve as guide to his warriors. All this was confessed by her messenger. The Oera Linda Book, the second writing. 15 months after the last General Assembly, at the festival of the harvest month, everybody gave himself up to pleasure and merrymaking, and no one thought of anything but diversion. But Raalda wished to teach us that watchfulness should never be relaxed. In the midst of the festivities, the fog came and enveloped every place in darkness. Cheerfulness melted away, but watchfulness did not take its place. The Coast Guard deserted their beacons, and no one was to be seen on any of the paths. When the fog rose, the sun scarcely appeared among the clouds, but the people all came out shouting with joy, and the young folks went about singing to their bagpipes, filling the air with their melody. But while everyone was intoxicated with pleasure, treachery had landed with its horses and riders. As usual, darkness had favored the wicked, and they had slipped in through the paths of Linda's wood. Before Adela's door, 12 girls led 12 lambs, and 12 boys led 12 calves. A young Saxon bestrode a wild bull which he had caught and tamed. They were decked with all kinds of flowers, and the girls' dresses were fringed with gold from the Rhine. When Adele came out of her house, a shower of flowers fell on her head. They all cheered loudly, and the fifes of the boys were heard over everything. Poor Adele, poor people, how short will be your joy. When the procession was out of sight, a troop of Magyar soldiers rushed up to Adela's house. Her father and her husband were sitting on the steps. The door was open, and within stood Adelbrost, her son. When he saw the danger of his parents, he took his bow from the wall and shot the leader of the pirates, who staggered and fell on the grass. The second and third met a similar fate. In the meantime, his parents had seized their weapons and went slowly to Jon's house. They would soon have been taken, but Adela came. She had learned in the Burgt to use all kinds of weapons. She was 7 feet high, and her sword was the same length. She waved it 3 times over her head, and each time a knight hit the earth. Reinforcements came, and the pirates were made prisoners. But too late. An arrow had penetrated her bosom. The treacherous Magy had poisoned it, and she died of it. The Elegy of the Burgtmaagd. Yes, departed friend, thousands are arrived and more are coming. They wish to hear the wisdom of Adela. Truly she was a princess, for she had always been the leader. O sorrow, what good can you do? Her garments of linen and wool she spun and wove herself. How could she add to her beauty? Not with pearls, for her teeth were more white. Not with gold, for her tresses were more brilliant. Not with precious stones, for her eyes, though soft as those of a lamb, were so lustrous that you could scarcely look into them. But why do I talk of beauty? Fria was certainly not more beautiful. Yes, my friends, Fria, who possessed 7 perfections, of which each of her daughters inherited 1, or at most 3. But even if she had been ugly, she would still have been dear to us. Is she warlike? Listen, my friend. Adele was the only daughter of our Geertmen. She stood 7 feet high, her wisdom exceeded her stature, and her courage was equal to both together. Here is an instance. There was once a turf ground on fire. 3 children got upon yonder gravestone. There was a furious wind. The people were all shouting, and the mother was helpless. Then came Adela. "What are you all standing still here for?" she cried. "Try to help them, and Raalda will give you strength." Then she ran to the krillwood and got some elder branches, of which she made a bridge. The others then came to assist her, and the children were saved. The children bring flowers to the place every year. There came once 3 Phoenician sailors, who began to ill-treat the children. When Adela, having heard their screams, beat the scoundrels till they were insensible. And then, To prove to them what miserable wretches they were, she tied them, all three, to a spindle. The foreign lords came to look after their people, and when they saw how ridiculously they had been treated, they were very angry, till they were told what had happened. Upon that they bowed themselves before Adele, and kissed the hem of her garment. But come, distant living friend. The birds of the forest fled before the numerous visitors. Come, friend, and you shall hear her wisdom. By the gravestone, of which mention has already been made, her body is buried. Upon the stone the following words are inscribed. Tread softly, for here lies Adela. The old legend which is written on the outside wall of the city tower is not written in the book of Adela's followers. Why this has been neglected, I do not know. But this book is my own, so I will put it in, out of regard to my relations. The Oera Linda Book. The Elegy of the Burgtmaagd. Yes, departed friend, thousands are arrived and more are coming. They wish to hear the wisdom of Adela. Truly she was a princess, for she had always been the leader. O sorrow, what good can you do? Her garments of linen and wool she spun and wove herself. How could she add to her beauty? Not with pearls, for her teeth were more white. Not with gold, for her tresses were more brilliant. Not with precious stones, for her eyes, though soft as those of a lamb, were so lustrous that you could scarcely look into them. But why do I talk of beauty? Fria was certainly not more beautiful. Yes, my friends, Fria, who possessed 7 perfections, of which each of her daughters inherited 1, or at most 3. But even if she had been ugly, she would still have been dear to us. Is she warlike? Listen, my friend. Adele was the only daughter of our Geertmen. She stood 7 feet high. Her wisdom exceeded her stature, and her courage was equal to both together. Here is an instance. There was once a turf ground on fire. 3 children got upon yonder gravestone. There was a furious wind. The people were all shouting, and the mother was helpless. Then came Adela. "What are you all standing still here for?" she cried. "Try to help them, and Raalda will give you strength." Then she ran to the krillwood and got some elder branches, of which she made a bridge. The others then came to assist her, and the children were saved. The children bring flowers to the place every year. There came once 3 Phoenician sailors, who began to ill-treat the children. When Adela, having heard their screams, beat the scoundrels till they were insensible. And then, to prove to them what miserable wretches they were, she tied them, all 3, to a spindle. The foreign lords came to look after their people, and when they saw how ridiculously they had been treated, they were very angry, till they were told what had happened. Upon that they bowed themselves before Adele, and kissed the hem of her garment. But come, distant living friend. The birds of the forest fled before the numerous visitors. Come, friend, and you shall hear her wisdom. By the gravestone, of which mention has already been made, her body is buried. Upon the stone the following words are inscribed. Tread softly, for here lies Adela. The old legend which is written on the outside wall of the city tower is not written in the book of Adela's followers. Why this has been neglected, I do not know. But this book is my own, so I will put it in, out of regard to my relations.